Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So inshallah we'll go back to the book after we talked a bit in more detail about the process of compilation and preservation of the Quran. We go back to this same hadith we stopped at because this hadith prompted us to speak about this subject. وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت كان فيما أنزل من القرآن 10 رضعات معلومات يحرم ثم نسخنا ب5 معلومات فتوفي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وهي فيما يقرأ من القرآن. Okay, let me translate. And I think most people have been here in the past few nights, right? When we talked about the Quran and naskh and preservation, abrogation, different qira'at. We talked about these things in some detail. So this hadith, it is very important to know this hadith because this hadith is one of those ahadith, those people who want to bring up doubts and shed doubts about Islam and Quran will use a hadith like this. And it is in Sahih Muslim. Bukhari did not narrate this hadith. That is why some scholars thought the hadith might not be authentic because they said if it was authentic, Bukhari would have narrated it. But still Muslim is, as I mentioned, is a trustworthy compiler of hadith and the chain of narration is authentic. That's what we go by, whether Bukhari narrates it or not, because Bukhari did not collect every authentic hadith. And he never said that. He actually said that he collected the most authentic of the most authentic. So he would go through so many authentic hadith and choose the most authentic narration with the strongest chain of transmission. You follow? No. And that is why Imam Bukhari says that ألفت كتابي هذا من 600,000 hadith. He says, I have compiled this book, I selected it from 600,000 hadiths. Imagine this. But Bukhari itself, Sahih al-Bukhari, if you take the number of hadith within it without the repetition, it will not be more than 4,300, 4,400. When they say, so how come he said 600,000 hadiths? The answer to this is that they used to consider each different narration from each different Sahabi, if the wording is a little bit different from one, because they narrate what they saw and what they heard. So you may transmit it in your wording, and I translated my wording, and so on, okay? You may have heard some things, the whole story, you may witness part of the story. So if there is a variation, he would, although they're talking about the same incident, or the same saying of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he would consider those different ahadith, if the chain of narration varies or the wording varies. So he may be talking about one hadith that has 30 or 40 different versions based on the chains of narration and the wording, okay? But they would all be authentic and he would choose the most authentic of those. And that's why Sahih al-Bukhari is basically a book that nobody can argue about. You know how long it took him to compile this book? Does anybody know?
25 years.
16 years.
16 years.
Took him 16 years to, and they said that he was so much into this book that he would always be thinking about the narrations, even at night. Some of his companions said that we counted for Imam Bukhari 2 different companions and 2 different journeys. They used to travel with him. Each one of them, I think one of them counted 10 times he woke up at night just to get up and write some notes. And another one counted 12 times. It's amazing. And then you find some lazy people nowadays, ignorant people, talking about Bukhari. Say, oh, we don't accept this hadith from Bukhari. And they really don't even equal his toe. They're not, in significance, those people are not as significant as the toe of Bukhari. Bukhari, during his lifetime, it is said that in his journeys to collect the hadith, he walked more than 8,000 kilometers. Like the journeys he made from, for instance, Khurasan to Iraq, and then he goes to Yemen, then he goes to Egypt, and then he goes back. This is a huge distance, about 8,000. Because I saw one time a lecture, a person, he basically wrote the route. He drew the route that Bukhari took from each country, and he looked at the distance on Google Maps. It was more than 8,000 kilometers. That is just in publishing this book. Now. So, going back to this hadith, the translation of this hadith, and I will add some more information about this hadith today. It's important that you listen to this. Where is the hadith of Aisha? Narrated by Aisha. can't. Well, let me just translate it. Yes, here it is. She said, in what was sent down in the Quran was 10 known feedings, like breastfeedings, made marriage unlawful. Afterwards, they were abrogated by 5 known feedings. Then, when Allah's Messenger ﷺ died, these words were among what was recited in the Quran. Okay. Now, so what is the question that can be raised about this hadith? What is the question?
Why was it changed from 10 to 5?
No, there's still 5.
Exactly. There's still 5.
Yeah.
But why was it changed to 10 to 5? This is abrogation, and we talked about abrogation, changing the law, changing the commandments from one commandment to the other. That is recurrent, not only in the Quran, but in all the previous revelations. We talked about this, correct?
No.
We talked about this in previously, that in all different revelations, there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can command people to do a certain thing, and then command them to do something else based on the situation of the people. Okay, based on their needs and the situation. Okay, but that's not an issue. This hadith shows that even the 5, the verse that said 5 is also abrogated. Okay, because although the ruling has remained, but the recitation of that verse is no longer in the Quran. This is called nasakh al-tilawa, to basically abrogate verses from the Quran that were revealed previously. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reveal them, send a certain teaching, and then He can abrogate it. If He abrogates that law, takes it away, cancels it, annuls it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may leave the verses in the Quran still. And there are verses like this, such as وَالَّذِينَ يَتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا وَصِيَّةً لِأَزْوَاجِهِمْ مَتَاعًا إِلَى الْحَوْلِ غَيْرَ إِخْرَاجٍ. This is an abrogated verse, but still in the Quran. That those women whose husbands die, the iddah was longer initially. It was, now how long is the iddah? The waiting period is
4.5.
4 months?
4, right?
4.5.
This is 4 months.
No. تربصنا بأنفسنا 4 أشهر و10. 4 months and 10 days. But it was 1 year before that. This was abrogated and made shorter. Okay, the ruling can go from a more strict ruling to a lighter ruling, or the opposite. Such as alcohol was initially allowed. Then it was forbidden. Just you don't become drunk to the salah, for instance. This is the ruling. You don't drink before the salah. But then it was totally forbidden, and so on. Okay, things came in steps. Same thing for ar-rada'ah. It was initially that only if they had 10 feedings. Okay. And then it was made even more strict. This is going from the less strict to the more strict, okay? That even 5 feedings will make the marriage unlawful, okay? But nasakh al-tilawa, the verses that were abrogated from the Quran are very little. Very abrogated, taken away from the Quran are very little. And basically we have hadith narrations that tell us about those verses. You can count them in number, maybe 4 or 5, such as this one here. And the verse of stoning, that was also taken out.
It was an abrogated verse actually.
Yeah, it is an abrogated verse as well. And for instance, لو كان لابن آدم واديا من ذهب لتمنى واديا ثانٍ. So those verses that were taken away, they say they are very little, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba indicate those verses that were taken out. Okay, so they're not many. And this is based on the ayah وَمَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نَأْتِي بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا. Allah said this, that if I abrogate, cancel or annul, take away a verse, نَأْتِي بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا, I will reveal or command the likes of it or something that is even better. Okay, أو مثلها. Okay, but this, of course, this topic of abrogation and taking verses out of the Quran, although they are very limited in number, of course, some people will use this to shed doubt about the Quran. And Allah talked about this in the Quran. وَإِذَا بَدَّلْنَا آيَةً مَكَانَ آيَةٍ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا يُنَزِّلُ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُفْتَرٍ. The meaning of this ayah is that when Allah is talking, He says, when I switch one verse to the other, and this is abrogation, Allah says, وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا يُنَزِّلُ. Allah knows best what He is revealing. He knows what He is revealing and what He is abrogating. Okay? قَالُوا إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُفْتَرٍ. They would say to the Prophet ﷺ, you're a liar. Okay,
Or you are
fabricator, or exactly. Allah says, "Bal aktharuhum la ya'lamun." The problem is not that. The problem is that they have no knowledge of how well preserved the Quran is, and we talked about this in multiple lectures that have passed. Whoever wants them, he can go back to the videos that we recorded about that. Okay, so we go back into this. Number one, the abrogated verses, where there's abrogation of the actual text of the verse, those are very limited. You have to know that. So if somebody brings this issue up, tell them we have like 4 or 5 verses, and even those verses are preserved within what?
Hadith.
Within the hadith. Okay. Now there's two ways of abrogation. There's abrogation nansakh or nunsiha. What is nunsiha?
Forgetting.
Make everybody forget. This has happened as well, where Allah reveals verses or a surah or part, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would lift this completely. What do you think the hikmah is behind that? What is the wisdom behind that?
Like for Laylatul Qadr, it was to make people work more for all the nights.
Exactly. That's an example. But here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows that He is the one in charge of this Quran. He reveals whatever He wills, He takes away whatever He wills, and He's in control of the people as well. For them to wake up next morning and nobody remembers this part, whether it is from whether the Prophet ﷺ himself or the Sahaba. And this explains the hadith. There is a hadith, and you will come across this hadith when it comes to abrogation, that says that Surah Al-Ahzab, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, I think, reports this hadith. He says there came a time where Surah Al-Ahzab was longer than Surah Al-Baqarah. And he says, basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us forget basically the whole, maybe first part of the surah, and left this part that we have today, which is basically maybe 1/4 of Surah Al-Baqarah, 1/4 of Surah Al-Baqarah. And he says, and I only remember, and still Allah left something so that people know that something happened here. I only remember from this surah, this is what the Sahabi says, that the verse of stoning was amongst those. And also this verse I just mentioned to you, that if the son of Adam had one valley full of gold, he would wish for a second one, and so on. So this was also a verse. But anyhow.
So Shaykh, this is also a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that all the Sahaba and everyone.
And the Prophet ﷺ. Everybody. Yeah. But still, if it was lifted and nobody remembers anything that it was even there, then nobody would know it was a miracle. But Allah would leave, a small trace like this, so people talk about, we used to recite this surah, it was longer than Surah Al-Baqarah, but now all we remember is that there was this ruling and this ruling, but nobody remembers.
That was probably maybe similar to the issue of the day of Laylatul Qadr. They said that some Sahabas were arguing as a result of that. Holy Prophet Sallallahu forgot.
Exactly.
It was because Allah wanted us to struggle to look for that night.
Exactly. Now, finally, this hadith here says when the Prophet ﷺ died, they were recited. Now, you can understand this as more than one way. فَتُوفِّيَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَهُنَّ فِيمَا يُقْرَأُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. In Arabic, you can use the past tense and you mean that, you don't actually mean that he died. You mean that near the end of his days, it was still being recited. She's basically saying that those verses of 5 feedings make marriage unlawful were still present till the very final days of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, which means that they were abrogated in the very last period of his life. There are examples of this in the Quran. For instance, Allah says, وَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. Do you see the wording here? When you recite the Quran, the wording is not recite, it is in the past tense. قَرَأْ means you have recited. فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. Say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. If you don't know Arabic, then you will finish reciting the Quran and then say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. If you don't know what this verse means, you don't know the proper Arabic, you will make the isti'adha after, because it is in the past tense. فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ means you have recited, فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. Then you make isti'adha. Okay? But it doesn't mean that. It means when you're preparing to recite, that's when you say isti'adha. Okay? Same thing here. So the wording of Aisha is that Prophet ﷺ died and they were still being recited. She doesn't mean died. She means that it was in his final days and they were still amongst the Quran, but then basically they were abrogated at the very end. This is also when we say قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةِ قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاة and iqamah, which means the salah has started. Or the salah has started. But has it started yet?
No.
It has not started. There are many examples of this actually. قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاة means it is going to start. قَدْ قَامَتْ means, okay? It is going to, but it has not. But the wording is in the what? In the past. And not only in the past tense, but you confirm it. قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاة, okay? So which means for surely it is going to start soon. But it doesn't mean. So many other things. أَتَى أَمْرُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَسْتَعْجِلُوا. Things like this. The matter of Allah or the commandment of Allah for the day of judgment has come, so on. Or the day of judgment has come. But it has not really come yet. Because he says, فَلَا تَسْتَعْجِلُوا. It says, don't
be in haste.
Don't be in haste for it. It's coming. It means it's coming. And so many other examples. Okay? You can understand it this way, and I think that's the most proper understanding. The other understanding of this is that if you really want to understand it, that he actually died, then the meaning would be that some Sahaba still had this verse in their own personal Quran, and they were still reciting it. Okay? They did not know it was abrogated because it was abrogated at the very end of the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? And only when they collected the Quran at the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, they only accepted what was left in the Quran and not abrogated, based on the final revision between Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Jibreel alayhi salam, which was attended by Zayd ibn Thabit. Initially I thought it was attended only by Zayd ibn Thabit, but it seems that it was attended by multiple Sahaba. One of them was Zayd ibn Thabit. And that is why when Umar ibn Khattab came to Zayd, because remember I told you how they collected the Quran in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, they made an announcement in Medina, and they stood in the streets and in the masajid. Anybody who has something that was written directly from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as Quran, he bring it forth, but he has to bring two witnesses that it was written directly from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so Umar al-Khattab brought forth the verse that talks about stoning, which is وَالشَّيْخُ وَالشَّيْخَةُ إِذَا زَنِيَا فَارْجُمُوهُمَا الْبَتَّ نَكَالًا مِنَ اللَّهِ. This is the wording of that verse. He brought it to Zayd. There's a narration that states that, and Zayd refused. He says, no, it has been abrogated. So Umar al-Khattab thought that it was still part, and Zayd, of course, Zayd is the primary, the number one scribe of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and one of the most skillful and knowledgeable about the Quran. So he refused. He says, bring witnesses. He says, no. He says it's abrogated. If you don't bring me witnesses that it's not abrogated, then we cannot. And it was. But you have to know those verses that were abrogated are in the Sunnah. So this way shows you that the Sunnah complements the Quran. You cannot understand the Quran. This is another sign that you cannot understand the Quran without the Sunnah. Without this hadith here, we wouldn't understand what went on with the matter of abrogation and so on. Okay, stop here. Any questions about this matter?
So just the third possibility that you mentioned about the possibility of this hadith.
Yes.
Is it possible that Aisha didn't know that it was abrogated? It's also because Umar ibn Khattab didn't know those verses were abrogated, and this is after 5-10 years after the Quran was compiled, right? So he's still reciting as if they're still there.
Yes.
So it's still possible that she didn't know that they were abrogated.
It is possible that she didn't know that it was abrogated, because it's not her specialty. It is a specialty of the scribes and the people, the memorizers of the Quran, and she was not one of the. She was not one of the memorizers of the Quran, the whole Quran actually. It is not. We don't have a narration indicating that Aisha radiallahu anha, although she's the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, knew the whole Quran from beginning to end. We know that many Sahaba knew, but we don't really have her name amongst those people. It is possible that she did not know, but whether it was her who didn't know or some other Sahabi who didn't know and was still reciting it or still had it in his mushaf, that doesn't matter. So either we understand it that it stayed until the last days, and before he died it was abrogated, or or it was abrogated at the end of, and some people were still reciting it. Okay, you follow what I'm trying to say? And this shows you that the personal masahif, the personal mushaf of different Sahaba, are they authoritative or not? No. That is so important. The only authoritative mushaf, official mushaf, is the mushaf compiled during the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq by an enormous effort that we talked about over a period of 16 months, where the whole community of the Sahaba, Medina, the memorizers, the reciters, the scribes, worked in cross-matching everything and knowing what was abrogated, what was not abrogated, what was recited in the salah, what was not, and so on, to compile the official Quran. And this was the prototype for which Quran, the Mus'haf Uthman, because basically what he took. Uthman also confirmed it, by the way. Uthman, when he wanted to write, to distribute the Masahif, he brought this Mus'haf as number one. He also asked some Sahaba to bring up their Masahif, and he compared and contrasted as well. But he considered this is the official one, and anybody who had something different from it had to do what? Burn it. Had to burn it, because this is the official Mus'haf that we can trust with a consensus about it. Anybody who has a personal, like made a mistake that he thought the verse was not abrogated, or he had in his Mus'haf some Sahaba, sometimes, like I mentioned to you, ثلاثة أيام متتابعات. He would sometimes, some Sahaba would write in the Quran, in their own Mus'haf, a word on the side to explain to themselves the meaning of an ayah, okay? For instance, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. فَأْذَنُوا in the ayah of riba. So one of the Sahaba had on the side, فَأَيْقِنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Which that be sure there will be if you indulge in riba, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will wage war against you. Okay? Ayqinu means be sure, but fa'adhanu means I'm announcing. Same meaning, but the thing is, they sometimes in their personal masahif it was allowed to do that. But in the official mushaf, basically it was only the Quran. You follow? So if somebody brings you today, say, oh, I have a manuscript of the mushaf of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and so on, give you something of Sahaba or a manuscript of unknown person. Number one, we told him these are people who could maybe have added anything like a explanation, or maybe they did not know, or maybe they made a mistake. Okay, because if I give you a mushaf right now and ask you to copy it, it's very likely me or you can make mistakes. But the official mushaf is what we go by, which was compared and contrasted and worked upon very hard by basically all the people who witnessed the Quran as it was revealed. This is what we go by. If you don't bring me the Mus'haf Osman, then you cannot hold me to any kind of manuscript that you bring. But alhamdulillah. And when you bring, for instance, the major manuscripts or the manuscripts of Sana'a, you know Sana'a in Yemen?
Yeah.
The major manuscripts of the first century, they found like 4,000 different manuscripts in that mosque in Sana'a in Yemen. And those are dated to about 70, between 40 to 70 Hijri year. When they were compared with today, as I mentioned to you, there was no difference. There was different qira'at, yes, the ways, dialects, but there was no difference in the actual wording of the Quran. And this whole book that I showed you the other day, History of the Quran, was detailing that. I've actually asked for two other books that specifically study those manuscripts, and inshallah when I have them, I will inshallah try to summarize to you everything that is said about those manuscripts of Sana'a. Because some people use those manuscripts, there's a variation in the Quran. No, those are the different dialects of recitation, the qira'at that we already know about. We didn't bring something new. But the actual text is the same. Inshallah, we'll stop here.